Hello and welcome to Big Data London, brought to you by Bright Talk. I'm Tim Carmichael from Ensifera, and this afternoon we're having a panel about optimizing your approach to enterprise level analytics. And I've got four really experienced and exciting people who are alongside us today, and I'm really grateful that you could join us on the panel, gentlemen. So who we have on the panel? We have Vincent, who is the Director of Product Management EMEA for Denodo, the data virtualization software company. Next to him I have Ted Orme, welcome Ted, who's the Head of Enterprise Data Integration Strategy EMEA for Qlik, for the Attunity Data Integration Division, the new acquisition by Qlik.
Thank you.
I have Richard Corderoy, the Managing Director of the Oakland Group, which is a full stack data and analytics consultancy. And last but by no means least, next to me is Andrew Morgan. Andrew, welcome, the Head of Data Science and Engineering for 6.6, a technology consultancy. So you can tell straight away, we've got a whole load of people here with me today who have lots of experience and understanding of this subject of enterprise level analytics. Richard, I'd like to come to you first, please, with the first question to kick off the conversation. And it's a question about scale, because many of us, for our clients or our customers, will be used to dealing with analytics in a smallish scale, but ramping it up to enterprise level. How do you see that work? How does it differ? What would be your recommendations of scaling up from enterprise to enterprise level?
So I think it's really interesting, because actually, in essence, the first part of it is exactly the same. Why do we do analytics? We do analytics to understand things, to add value, and that value either has to improve the decision making in the business and drive business direction, or directly improve processes and operations, things that actually happen in the business. Otherwise, kind of, what's the point? I suppose the challenge as you scale is actually at the ends of the analytics. Where do I get my data from? How do I know I'm getting the right data and that I can trust it? And clearly, as you grow, how do I know I'm only getting the data that I should have access to? Because it's a big world out there. And then how do I make sure that the output of those analytics actually gets to the right people at the right time, and they can believe it and it's trustworthy? And actually the actual mechanics of the analytics I don't think is necessarily the hard bit. It's how do you do those bookends where the complexity starts to grow really, really quickly.
Because part of the challenge with this complexity is the fact that many organizations at enterprise scale are working in silos, and yet data and the insights from it tend to flow horizontally across silos, and they're not a prisoner of a certain silo. How do you work on breaking down those silos so that your clients can really exploit the total value of the insight at their disposal?
Well, I think part of it is recognizing those silos exist. You're absolutely right. Most businesses, or many businesses historically, are kind of run functionally. I have a sales team, an ops team, a delivery team, a service team, and the data flows across that and doesn't respect any of those traditional boundaries at all. So the first thing you have to do to get the business to recognize that's happening, and actually this is the hard bit, the business is probably going to have to change both from a technology point of view, but also from a real world organizational point of view, if you want these things to happen. Because if every silo has their own pot of data and reports to their own content, then A, you miss a load of value and you spend your life arguing about which is the right number, which isn't terribly useful for anyone.
Do you see the same in the organizations that you support, in terms of the way that you have to help them understand that it's a liberating factor and not a constraining factor?
So right now there is tons of silos, and people have organized themselves around business divisions, and they're doing that mainly for budgetary reasons, I think. So there'll be someone who funds a data initiative, and they'll build a database of some kind, a data warehouse even, and those silos, the problem with that is that for like data science, for example, you want to integrate the data together and have a mixed group of signals so you can get a richer set of data from which to predict and act, right? So if you wanted a single customer view so you could be more relevant with the consumer, the only way to do that is to integrate the data across those silos.
So we'll come to integration later in a bit more detail, but there's a point there, isn't there, about how do you avoid data hoarders, the people in the business who often are in charge of those silos. You say, no, that's my data. Stay away from my data. Why should I share my finance data with your HR data, or whatever it might be? How do you help coach them to understand that there's more value to be had in sharing?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I think that does go on, and a large part of a data scientist's time is actually securing access to data. And typically over the last, say, 7 years, that was a large amount of the problem. The other problem was actually just knowing that it was there, right? So In a number of cases, well, for most organizations, I think it's imperative that they understand their data assets. And we used to call that enterprise data model, but that's fallen out of favor as people then move to more asset registers. And that's being driven, I think, by GDPR. And that's been a big boom for us because we now know where to go to get the data. And people have to hold up their hand and declare the data assets that they're actually managing. And then from the siloism point of view, now you know it's there, you can go and integrate it.
That's a really fair shout. Vincent, let me bring you in on that conversation because it's all about getting the data to the right place at the right time. That doesn't necessarily mean real time, although for some solution spaces, of course it will. But the right data, the right time, the right security, so that data scientists, analysts, and self-service data citizens can consume it in a way they want to consume it. What's the best way, in your experience, to do this?
Well, you're perfectly right. I mean, nowadays, data are all over the place. I mean, you find data in different formats, on different sources, in a cloud, on-premise, multi-cloud. And the challenge is really to get the right data securely, in the right timing, for the data scientists, for the business user, to be able to leverage those data across those platforms in a transparent way. So to dissociate basically the business users you're doing of the data from the way they're stored and managed by the IT. And this is all the challenge our customers are facing. It's okay, fine, my IT, I have an ecosystem which is coming from inheritance, which is in different formats, legacy system, we want to move to the cloud, we want to merge, integrate data coming from numerous sources to get business value out of that. And then the business user want to ensure the quality of the data, want to be able to make some data science, some machine learning, to get some dashboarding, some visualization. And then that's become an integration challenge. And the integration challenge means putting some pipelines between the different sources. And the problem is once the pipelines are there, you cannot move them away. So if you want to evolve and to change your IT architecture, you cannot because it will impact the business. So the idea of putting a layer in between, a data virtualization layer in between, which is what we do, to provide access in real time or as quickly as possible to the data, to manage the security, who's got the right to access which data in a timely manner, and to deliver this data in a unified way, regardless of the form, whether it's SQL, non-SQL, APIs, data services, or even unstructured data. This is the way to do it. So this is really the value proposition.
So Ted, when you're taking that kind of challenge of being able to access multiple source data, and we'll talk more about that later, somewhere in there in the integration space there's an access management challenge as well, isn't there? Do you find that your customers are alive to the need to govern that space?
I think they are. It's specifically then understanding these two worlds here, and we are in this junction of these two worlds within the business. It's the analytics world that is often line of business, that is answering questions of data. They understand the metrics, they understand what they're trying to achieve. And that's where the visualization layers and the insight that we can drive through all of the different dashboarding or analytics tools. But also IT here, we're talking about the challenges of silos of IT. And these two worlds collide. These two they understand things differently. And this is where overcoming these silos is a strategic decision. And I like the phrase often that is used from one of our clients, is that strategy, culture eats strategy. If you have a culture within an organization to make data available, to use that data, to empower your teams to drive and innovate differently, that will then, technology can solve it. Technology can solve these problems, whichever routes, whichever products you go down, but that being able to drive that, to break those silos, is where here at an event like this, you see all these different vendors about how they do that, but you have to have the buy-in to do that. And what we see is often, Gartner have phrased this sort of data ops methodology about how you can do more with data and drive innovation and change. And bringing that type of methodology into your strategy, I've got a cloud-first strategy. So what does that mean when you actually come down to that? I've got SAP on-premise. What does cloud-first strategy mean to do that? I've got to bridge that gap between those two. But if you have that sort of that senior leadership that can drive projects to say, this is where we're going. I'm going on GCP, I'm going Databricks, on AWS. These are technology decisions, but how you empower your individuals is I think, the important part.
Some really great points you're making there, particularly about leadership and empowerment. And from my perspective as a data leader, I think that one of the core challenges is to help show the way and help insist on the right behaviors. Because it's leadership that drives cultural change, and it's cultural change that will drive value in this space. And I think one of the challenges that I've faced repeatedly is convincing people of what's in it for them. It's a very straightforward question. Do you get to see this a lot?
Really and it's so easy at a conference like this, and we're all technologists and love the tech, and you get into all of that, and you know, there is a load of technical complexity. We'll probably get into it about how you bring the data together. But back to your point, you know, businesses are arranged around silos. I paid for my database in my division because it helps solve my problem, and there's quite a lot of power in me having that. And you know what? I might be doing all sorts of things in the finessing the numbers that come out of that to kind of get the answers we've built up over the years, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But of course, as soon as you start wanting to share that with everyone else, that sort of dark arts economy starts to come into the light, and that's quite painful for people. Analysts whose reason for being is because they can do this thing struggle. Business leaders who are flattered or otherwise by the results that produce suddenly find it harder because my count of customer numbers doesn't equal your count of customer numbers, and surely we must know how many customers we have. And so it's a much more much bigger challenge to the fabric of the business than just piping some data around and sharing some graphs, quite frankly.
No, I agree, thank you. Andrew, let me come to you now, because you're right at the heart of the construction part of analytics, if you like, where it's data engineering and data scientists, cohering the data, making it available, as Vincent was saying, in real time with the appropriate security, and then doing the magic, the Harry Potter school of data science, where some fairly clever stuff happens. With that, of course, you've got data scientists who are a special breed of people. How do you advise for your clients the best way to harness data scientists and to employ them to make that difference that just an analyst can't do, forgive the expression?
Yeah. So I think there's a bit of history now. I probably started this journey in 2013, and back then the journey was a little different. I think then it was a struggle to get permission. And so to get funding and permission in an environment from which to operate was really the big concern. The second piece, as things kind of matured, is we finally got this engagement from more senior levels. And actually we were kind of bitten by our own success. So what we got asked to do was a lot of pet projects that were really infeasible. And so actually the success rates of data science weren't high as we chased these kind of moonshots, right? And then it was a long time before we could convince people that you need a portfolio approach to managing data science. And what you need to do is assess very closely up front the value of each project against the spend of each project, against the risk of success and the complexity. And then through managing that portfolio, you can balance out some early big wins against things that are harder later when you get a more experienced team. And now that's now underway. I think most people are thinking about data science as a portfolio game. And then the question now comes back to what you guys are talking about. Like, how do we actually now scale it up? Now we have a big list. And in that arena, actually, what we're seeing probably amongst a large number of companies is data scientists kind of hanging out in groups of 4 to 5 people. And actually, they're replicating their work and they're overlapping in their functions very highly across the different divisions from which they're operating in silos. And so now we're talking about things like feature stores where we can actually, it's like a data warehouse for data scientists. And we're talking about how we can then improve their value, right, by accelerating them, by deduplicating all of that overlapping kind of work that they do to cleanse and host the data and to get access to that data in production. So those are some of the big things that we're working on to scale up the science now.
So as a chief data officer and a chief analytics officer, occasionally I find myself being the chief stick fetcher, where someone says, there's my pet project, go solve.
Sure.
And sure, you go solve it, and that's great, and everyone feels happy about that, but the whole point about having a much more systematic approach, and that of course talks to prioritization and really clear prioritization. And what I've found when you're in agile methodology talking about grooming a backlog of work, which one comes before the other one can become quite a sensitive and emotional conversation. So the best way to flip that conversation is, I don't want you to agree on the prioritization and the backlog. I want you to get together and agree on the criteria against which we'll prioritize for you.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of criteria that you're looking for that will help you prioritize projects for your customers and clients when it comes to delivering analytics insights? You've already mentioned difficulty, risk, cost. What else are we looking for that will help them agree to a set of priorities against which then you create a prioritized backlog?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the sort of, people always sort of say like the low-hanging fruit, let's pick something that we can show ROI. And I think this is, again, business often just have their questions they want to answer, whereas IT often have a number, a dollar value against that. So you want to be able to show value early. You've got to justify the expense that you're putting into these platforms, these overall sort of infrastructure. And so often it's the newer divisions within the CDO division, the data architect or the enterprise architect will often be that gatekeeper that here's all the projects, here's all the sort of, what can we actually deliver on? What are the actual sort of, I know that this is a 3-month project, but this is a 12-month project, but the value within that. So it's often an IT spend sort of metric that is defined. But the business value, again, this is where it comes back to the business value. It may be a 2-week project that just changes the whole culture of the overall platform. That means you can deliver on the 12-month project faster. So having that, that sort of Scrum mentality of going in, doing something fast, creating some just, is this prototype, is this roughly what we're doing, is this right, and then moving on and doing more with that. Having a discussion, having a conversation with data, both from the business side, but also from, with data science, running things like, having data robot with their 2 competing models fighting against each other that then show value, having visualization, but making sure that every outcome is measured, and then you explain that back again. It's not just a sandbox. I mean, data scientists that live in a little world that count their numbers and work amongst themselves are lost within large organizations, are lost if they don't have that champion at the front that is explaining that business value to them. And then the platform and tools to do that are there to help them. But you have to show value. You have to show value. There's no shortcut there. And every organization has been burnt in the past with doing this. Everyone knows the sort of, the first data lakes ROI were horrible, the next went there, so let's try this. They've all been burnt. So the people that are still there now are cautious. But I think the other part that's just is the technology that has caught up. You see this also in the answer all the events, the sort of as a service style technologies. The Databricks is a data Spark as a service, Snowflake, data warehouse as a service. It's the fact that now everything is consumable in chunks that makes it, come on, let's let's try something in a sandbox. Let's try. The business can now allocate some funds to say, let's go and try this, and now truly the technology vendors that are there to have to show value. You can't just turn up with a big number and say, give me a licensed product and move on. You have to show value at every stage of a project, and they're better for it.
Sorry, is that where virtualization makes a difference?
Well, we do contribute to minimize the amount of data replication, for example. So this get a contribution in terms of cost of managing the data. I mean, when you're managing the data in a cloud, you have to pay for the storage. When you get the data out, you pay to get the data out. So having a virtualization layer, having this capability to be able to limit the amount of data you replicate, keep only the right data. I mean, this can have also an impact on the carbon footprint. I mean, we can look at the value, a different kind of value. And the value proposition is also make sure you're using the right data, you protect the information, you compliant with GDPR, so you stop duplicating the data all over the place, and you know where are the data, you know who's accessing the data, you have a single way to get access to the data. So I mean, you can see values everywhere, you can see more opportunity in revenue, you can see value in cost saving. That's where we see the value, and this is how we calculate our ROI. So it's more in terms of running your big data infrastructure and how you save costs on that.
Go ahead.
So just on that point, I think what I'm seeing is there used to be a big emphasis on choosing tools. And an enterprise architect would kind of decide on tools and we would rationalize based on those decisions. And then the data would be all over the place. And actually what I'm seeing now is a move actually to relax tool choice and to bring the data together. So now we're rationalizing the data and the tools we're using are much more like the App Store. So you just go onto the cloud and you can choose your technology very quickly and you can chop and change. And in the data science world, that's how we're adding the value very quickly to move on from one algorithm to the next. But we can't go and do that with our data stores, right? And our data access layers. So that's where we're rationalizing the data sets and where the value comes. But it's a much changed enterprise architecture landscape today.
That's what Peter Jackson, who is one of the leading thinkers in this country on this, he's the Chief Data Officer at Legal & General, would say is about having a polyglot approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You've got to be prepared for people to think, use different tools for a similar purpose because it suits them for the way that they'll interpret it.
So just an interesting build on that though, and we're starting to see it, so Databricks is ML Flow and there are other tools are available which are now a bit less about selling the latest algorithm or the latest bit of compute, and actually are about orchestration, because the part of that environment where people have lots of choice is how do you, there's a kind of growing up of our profession here of, well, if I'm going to create lots of algorithms, how do I know which is the current one, which is live, which is, and things that, IT and software development, quite frankly, have nailed for quite a few years now. I think this is the industry catching up with the thinking now of actually we need to ground where we do, and back to how do you pick which projects do we proceed. Well, let's have a bit of governance around that, and it's a bit dull, isn't it? But actually that's how you grind out value and don't do lots of expensive mistakes.
I think governance to enable is definitely part of it. And Ted, all of this is quite rightly best set so that it can be consumed and understood in context in a data strategy.
Understood, and that for me is a critical. We're I think at a really interesting tipping point now in the cloud journey. In that, I think we saw it in the sort of 2007, 2008 analytics. The big stack vendors used analytics as a mechanism for lock-in. They used it as there were all those acquisitions that brought that in. That just we can do everything for you. Trust us. We've got this big shiny piece of tin that does everything for you. And then that broke, and now we're on the cloud and the cloud journey, but now we're seeing a similar sort of journey, and that the cloud vendors and everybody is saying, we can do everything for you, and there's this, but actually data, that openness of data, we hear that on all of our enterprise clients. They do not want vendor lock-in on one cloud or over another, on things like that, and we are absolutely front and center in being this sort of making data open and making data available wherever you need it. You still have your on-premise transactional systems that are running the business. They're not going, people have been trying to get rid of mainframe is there running the business. It's their big Oracle, SAP environments. The cloud vendors all want that data. They all want that data on their clouds and run their analytics. But I think it's critical, and over these next couple of years, that the openness of that data, so that we're, Gartner called us as the leading independent vendor for that data, of moving data, of making it wherever your client needs. And for us, helping people having that multi-cloud strategy, running the compute, because that's what people want at the end of the day, the separation of compute and storage. Storage is virtually free nowadays, but compute, that's what's running the business. And that needs to run on any cloud across any structures, wherever there's, and that's where we're seeing that sort of strategic vision of an open data strategy to run then analytics across anything. That's really how we help people on that journey.
And basically, you're perfectly right. Even the cloud vendor recognize now that every single organization is in fact multi-cloud. So there is not like this kind of hybrid architecture which is on-premise and one cloud vendor, but everyone recognize they have to deal with multi-cloud plus the on-premise, and that's a challenge they're facing now. They know the data will be all over the place. We need, moving to the cloud it's a way to centralize again the data elsewhere in the cloud and no on-premise. But now we are multi-cloud, so we need to process the data where the data is, and we start to speak about edge computing, edge data processing, and that's another area we're entering.
So when you're in that situation, Vincent, let's explore that a bit further, where there's cloud, there's on-prem, there's hybrid, there's multi-cloud, there's third-party data that you're acquiring or procuring, there's the data that you're generating yourself, it's structured, unstructured, semi-structured. all the different flavors. It might be live streaming, it might be batch. You've got to figure out some sort of approach to multi-source integration, I assume. And how do you balance the need to access all those different sources of data against the cost of doing it wrong?
Well, that's a very good question, because I mean, once you get your data in the cloud, you've got this English term, which is egress cost, which is the cost of getting the data out. And that's all a challenge. So if you want to process like billions of data which are in a data lakes, in a cloud platform, plus some data warehousing data, and you want to get some reporting out of that, if you need to get back all your data into your data analytics or visualization platform, then this has a cost. So by using some kind of technology like data virtualization technology, you can use this technology to orchestrate the query across the multi-platform to delegate the processing to the different cloud or to the different nodes, and make sure you get only the valuable, the aggregated data. And then you have to leverage as well with the processing capability, so to get the best out of your sources, and to make sure that maybe some sources do not have any processing capability. They're log files. I mean, a log file, you cannot run a select on aggregation on a log file. So then you need to bring this capability and provide this capability by some caching technology, which you attach to the virtualization layer to leverage a massive parallel processing engines. So orchestrate all those queries to deliver the data for the visualization, for the analytics, and to the data scientists.
So Vincent, on that point, if I had a data virtualization technology and I had a database, it feels and looks like a database to me.
Yeah,
and behind the scenes, it's the whole organization. But if there's 3,500 tables, I don't know how they join up to run the queries anymore, right? So what we're actually saying to people is, as soon as you get beyond about 2,000 tables, then operators can no longer manage that complexity. We're looking at knowledge graphs as the mechanism for navigating, and AI-enabled knowledge graphs to join that data up for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so that feels more like actually go and fetch the data and load it back into something now. So we're seeing actually a trade-off between the virtualization and this new thing maybe that's coming on the outside.
Is that making people feel uncomfortable?
I think it's new. It's a new technology, right? And it's a new approach. It's been used by a lot of the big firms for a long time. Some very large data companies have invested in knowledge graphs. However, I think the typical enterprise is still using tabular data and just doing general analytics and then using it for science. But what we're saying to people is, as you pool that data together, if it gets over this kind of threshold where users are no longer able to interpret what's there, then we need to think about how smart query planners go beyond the relational database.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, and graph database is another way to look at the data and the relationship you get between the data. But I mean, the relational database approach is still valuable. And I mean, as you said, mainframe are still running the enterprise. If you look at IoTs, I mean, we start to talk about time series, and the way you get time series data is a different way. But at the end of the day, if you need to merge and to join your time series data with your customer data, your information, you still need to get this kind of technology, but you're perfectly right. I mean, 2,000 tables, this is not manageable, and this is where you need a person like you to advise your customer and to get the best usage out of the pipeline, or I mean, what we provide as a data virtualization. So you cannot do everything without managing, without getting the right logical data lake or logical data warehouse like the Gartner is telling. So what we're providing is this capability to really dissociate the way you manage the data from the way you use the data.
Now, whatever way you're managing it, whatever way you're using it, ultimately there's a point of consumption. There's a point where someone, an analyst, a busy business leader, is going to take that insight, or maybe foresight or hindsight if you want to make it temporal, and consume it in a way that adds value. And just a brief story, the first time I was a chief data officer, we did some work with some advanced analytics for the first time for this organization, and I was really proud of the insights we were generating, and they just didn't land. And my board was looking at them and going, yeah. And it took me a while to realize, okay, so the insights are valid and useful, but the visualization is poor. So I ended up hiring in a designer to make it pretty. And I came up with this thing about the power of pretty. But a conversation that we were having earlier about, there's a point where the power of pretty becomes the tyranny of beauty. There are some organizations and people out there now who can create some stunning visualizations, some stunning ways of portraying their insight, but actually what about the quality of the analytics and the analysis that's gone on behind them? Richard, would you like to kind of help us understand how do we preserve the quality of the analysis that feeds that insight?
So we're very keen on this notion of the data factory. You know, on the left-hand side of your factory, you have goods in. Let's think about it in the real world. We can all think in the real world, and actually, you should do some checks and controls as that data comes in. Did your massive ETL process that's supposed to happen overnight actually happen, or is something for do you know what you've got is good? And then do you know how those goods are going to be used across your factory? So which goods are going to get taken across and turned into standard reports? Which goods are going to be broken up into chunks that analysts or sort of regular analysts can use, because actually you kind of know the questions they're going to use, and which chunks you're going to break up and perhaps give full-on data scientists sort of unfettered access to go and do their wizardry. And it's actually having control of that process and visibility of that process and understanding, and it's really it's old-fashioned, isn't it? Understanding the use cases on the right side of what people want, and pretty visualization has a real role to play. My old story, I used to work in nuclear submarines, and the original panels used to run the things with was this thing out of the 1960s. You couldn't tell what was going on, and make it look like, make it tell a story, and that's really important. And obviously that's important, but then there comes a point where there's diminishing returns and that. So it's kind of getting that balance right, but more importantly, knowing that the factory that's feeding it is running well. Otherwise, you could be beautiful graphs telling nonsense.
And you want to make sure that feeding that factory, the data factory, is the data lab. Upstream of that, where the data scientists can play safely in a sandbox and go enjoy, make mistakes, create something new and exciting. And then there comes a point where that's mature enough to throw over the fence to the factory and to be productionized and put into production with the appropriate safeguarding around that. So I think there's still a space to play in that sort of creative anarchy. But I think what's important is that the quality of what ends up being landed in a new business as usual is quite important to safeguard, no matter how pretty or tyrannical the beauty of it is.
I think this is where, with sort of the Qlik in our understanding about how we're helping people on that journey, so we've phrased this sort of third generation of BI and analytics, which starts with this first part of the democratization of data, making data available, usable, streaming it wherever it's needed on any platform, independent of cloud, that's the sort of the bringing the data. The combination of then sort of AI and analytics, what we call the augmented analytics, sort of bringing both AI and the users together to do more. But the third part is the most important part, which is really it's about adoption, it's about uses, it's about when we're helping doctors going around the wards and they're looking at their iPads, do they think they're an analyst? Do they think they're a data scientist when they're looking at their... No, they're front and center helping their clients. When postmen are out, the Royal Mail, and when postmen are out delivering their things, do they think they're an analyst? Do they think they're not, but they're using data to do their jobs better. So the adoption side is that last leg that is just, however great your science, however great, if people are not using the data, empowering people, and they don't always know, and that's where getting the data into their hands so they're doing their job better, but they don't realize that they're looking at a dashboard and a view, they're just using it every day to deliver better for their organization. That's the end point that I think that people are striving for.
Ted, I think it's a really important point, and that brings me on to my last question, and it's a really quick one. I want, in 10 seconds from each of you, what is the single thing that you would advise your customers or clients to do to improve the ROI on this investment in data and analytics? You're first. No time to think.
Start your data science projects like you mean to get them into production. POCs don't get into production, they don't add revenue at the end of the day. Brilliant. So start as you mean to go on.
Thanks, Andrew. Richard?
In all the excitement to get going, don't forget the basics. Understand your value stream, understand actually what data you've got and pick battles that you can win. Don't do the moonshot, do something you can deliver, and then actually make sure you do something that adds value and makes a difference in the real world.
Thank you, Ted.
Again, moonshot, we say the same things. Don't try and boil the ocean. I mean, it's just not there. Pick one source, one question that you can't answer. Focus on that, show on value, that one source to that question to answer business outcome, end to end, and then grow,
Vincent, last words.
Exactly the same thing. I mean, start with a business use case, define what you want to get out. Don't have a look at what you have and what you can get from what you have, but define what you want, and then you get a technology that would help you to get the things out. So really things at the business impact first.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Vincent, Ted, Richard, Andrew, thank you and merci. That's it from all for us now from Bright Talk for this particular episode of the webcast on how to optimize your enterprise analytics. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tim Carmichael and we'll see you next time at Big Data London.